Okay, let's get the ball rolling. Ayan, kamusta kayo dyan? Happy feast day to everyone. A blessed feast day. At of course, yung mga very much following yung translasyon, the whole religious ceremony and its symbolism. A blessed day sa inyo, mga kameta. Mga kasama po natin on different platforms, including, of course, on Facebook, on YouTube, and increasingly also, hopefully, dito sa TikTok. Maraming salamat sa mga nag-join sa atin. In fact, medyo late tayo nag-start today dahil isa sa mga isa sa mga highlights of today natin kumbaga was yung meeting po natin with our friends, sila Sir Toff, sila Bey, among others from TikTok Philippines, no. So katulad ng alam nyo, mga kameta, yung sa nakaraan na buwan medyo nag-raise tayo ng issue about alleged or potential censorship ng West Philippine Sea related or yung mga issues na sensitive para sa China. Obviously, alam natin, of course, ang TikTok po ay originated from China. Yung ByteDance company is really China-based. And obviously, alam niyo naman lahat ng mga concerns na ni-raise about data privacy, about potential disinformation, weaponization, etc. So in fairness naman, we had a very constructive conversation. Katulad ng sinasabi ko parati, may position naman ako dun sa issue ng TikTok. At parati ko sinasabi, hindi ko naman sinisingle out ang TikTok dahil may China angle. Nag-raise din po tayo ng concern sa iba't platforms. Kung maalala ng ibang kameta natin na back in 2020 for almost 2 months, no? For almost 2 months nawala po tayo ng page, no, sa Facebook before. So very traumatic ng experience. I never got the proper explanation from them except that nagkaroon ng glitch. Napaka-unresponsive ng Facebook Philippines back in the day. Yan, pinagalitan ko na. So, in-escalate ko yung issue sa HQ nila. And eventually, from HQ nila, bumaba yung issue and then inutusan yung mga tao nila dito at inayos na. But anyways, after that naman, bumawi naman sila Ma'am Claire, etc. So, thank you sa mga Facebook Philippines for eventually helping with some of these issues. I'm hoping also ma-resolve din yung mga issues ng mga ibang kaibigan natin, ng mga ma'am, pwede may check para ano. Sana rin ma-resolve yung issues ng mga kaibigan natin katulad nila Mark Gamboa, mga oras parang alam ko pati sila yung kaibigan natin si Attorney Libayan rin yata parang naapektuhan yung kanyang account kasi may mga nagko-comment ng isang araw na eto si nagpapatawan sila ni Banat Bay, ganun. Ay, no sound pa rin. Tanggalin ko nga to. Ayan, may sound na. Sorry sa mga ka-TikTokers. Anyway, no. So, sinasabi ko lang na marami tayong issues sa mga iba't ibang platforms but yung isang buwan nagkaroon din ng problema kasi nung kasagsagan ng huling hidwaan dyan sa yung Injol, nag-post tayo ng mga analysis ukol sa West Philippine Sea pero parang for some reason hindi sila napapublish. Actually, 5 yung pinost ko yung total. Na-delete ko yung 2 or 3 dyan. Pero yung 2 dyan, hindi rin sila na-publish for days. May screenshot na tayo na and all of that. So, anyway, I had some concerns with that. But in fairness naman, salamat kay Sir Toff, sa IBEA, yung mga kaibigan natin sa TikTok Philippines. You know, at least we had a very constructive conversation. At sabi ko nga, kahit kahit may mga disagreement ako sa polisiya ng China, kahit may konting disagreement tayo doon sa polisiya nila sa West Philippine Sea, kahit may mga disagreements tayo sa some things here and there. I think there are a lot of good things that also TikTok can do for the Philippines, particularly in terms of creating a more inclusive environment sa social media. Kasi alam niyo naman, at ito yung gusto kong sa explanation ng mga kaibigan natin sa TikTok Philippines is, pag tinignan mo yung TikTok, hindi siya, yung algorithm niya, it's interest-based rather than social network-based, di ba? Kasi pagdating sa mga traditional social media platforms katulad ng Facebook, YouTube to a certain degree, and Instagram especially, marami kang mga engagement sa mga post mo kung marami ka rin mga kaibigan, friends, and followers. Sa TikTok, hindi mo kailangan yan. Kaya halos wala kang kaibigan or followers, sana naman may kaibigan ka sa totoong buhay. Pwede ka magkaroon ng mga viral videos. In fact, yung first video pa lang natin sa TikTok, more than 100,000 views ang nakuha niya. At halos zero ang followers natin. Ay because I was Now, of course, pwedeng sabihin dahil siguro medyo kilala ka ng iba, hindi naman marami, pero yung iba. No, pero pansin ko, yung algorithm niya, it allows for anyone na hindi naman kailangan na establish, hindi naman kailangan ng maraming followers, hindi naman kailangan ng maraming friends na social. Pwede kang at least magkakaroon ng 15 seconds of fame, no? And more importantly, the thing also with TikTok is dahil entertainment-oriented siya, madali yan para sa for anyone, no, to create something na ma-appreciate ng taong bayan, no, because yun nga hindi kasi for instance sa Twitter kailangan na medyo magaling ka sa prose or magaling ka sa medyo wordsmith ka or alam mo paano mo ikasya yung mga komplikadong idea in like probably half a sentence or so. So medyo may pagka-poetry dyan, di ba? Sa Facebook naman, siguro tinitingnan ng iba, magandang packaging, production, etc. Sa TikTok, kahit ano lang, kahit simple lang production mo, kahit hindi bongga yung production mo, kahit nagsiselfie ka lang dyan sa, sa tabi-tabi, ganon. Maganda pa rin ang magiging engagement mo dyan. So it's a much more inclusive in a sense that it allows for a zero to hero situation much faster than any other algorithm, no? So kunyari dito sa TikTok, ilan lang post natin naka 20-30,000 followers na tayo agad, no? Obviously hindi ako kasing active sa TikTok until recently, so sana maayos natin yan. Pero kunya ang hirap makakuha ng 100,000 followers sa Twitter. It took some of us half a decade to get around 100,000 followers there, no? So there's something very interesting about TikTok. At alam natin yung TikTok, very appealing ito sa mga kabataan. And alam din natin na increasingly ba't yung mga hindi kabataan masyado, katulad natin ng mga medyo older millennials, yung mga Gen X, if not 60 above, yung mga katulad ng mga mighty magulang, no? Medyo successful talaga sila sa TikTok. And one of the good things I also like about TikTok recently is yung tinatawag na book talk, no? Among others. So in short, I still have my strong position pagdating sa potential influence of the Communist Party of China dun sa operations of big Chinese originated companies, whether it's Huawei, whether it's ZTE, but also to saying the ByteDance. But I also appreciate yung engagement natin with our friends dyan sa TikTok Philippines. And I also appreciate the other things that TikTok is doing na hindi related sa politics at nakaka-contribute, no, sa social inclusion, social development, not to mention yung mga maliliit na mga negosyo, no. So maraming actually, hindi naman yumaman lahat, pero marami din nang nagkaroon ng kahit pa paano, 'di ba? Nagkaroon ng konting livelihood, 'di ba? Dahil sa TikTok, 'di ba? Kasi nakakabenta sila on TikTok. Although of course, ang suggestion ko diyan, know also about taxes, no? Kasi kailangan yung magbayad ng buwis, 'di ba? Kung kumikita kayo kahit sa online purchase. So nakaka-contribute din ito sa small and medium enterprises, especially small enterprises dyan sa ating emerging digital economy. Now, having said all of that, punta na naman tayo sa discussion natin. Dito pag-usapan natin. So actually kahapon pa lang lumabas na itong mga surveys, Pulse Asia survey. In-email naman sa atin ng Pulse Asia survey. So if you look at the big survey agencies, they email it to you. So may email list sila ng mga journalists, mga experts, mga tao na email sa'yo bago ito na publish sa media, etc. And of course, yung mga iba naman, kung medyo kaibigan mo naman yung boss or something na yung survey agencies, minsan bina-Viber lang sa'yo, di ba? Ito po kasi nakita ko lang sa email ko kahapon na most urgent issue ang nandito. But it looks like lumabas na rin yung kompleto pala siya eh. So andun din pala yung approval ratings ng ating mga politiko, no? Including si President Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte. And interestingly, mukhang umakyat ang approval ratings ng mga top leaders natin, although very marginally. Very marginally. So at least hindi bumaba lalo. Kasi nakita natin, di ba, naalala niyo yung third quarter, bugbog talaga, no? Double-digit drop pareho, no? Yung top leaders natin, like BBM, grabe yung baksak ng numbers niya, di ba? So now his numbers are closer to the median trend dun sa mga nakaroon na presidente. Kasi, well, President Duterte medyo 80-90% siya at this point. But most of other presidents, Cory, Ramos, Erap, Arroyo not as a president, but as a vice president, medyo mga ganitong level yung kanilang approval ratings at this point in time. No? So, pag-usapan natin yan. Pero actually, ang gusto ko talagang pag-usapan today, mga kameta, pag sinasabi ko meta, hindi ibig sabihin, Facebook lang. Actually, meta means next level, right? So like meta-narratives, meta-analysis, no? Kaya nga pinalitan din ang pangalan ni Zuckerberg. Pero bago pinalitan ni Zuckerberg ang pangalan ng Facebook, naisip ko na yung meta na yan. Meta, kasi meta, next level, di ba? Lively, interesting, exciting, malalim, yan. So metaverse, di ba? Meta-universe. So yun, balikan natin itong mga ka-metaverse. Yan, okay, ito. Actually, gusto ko pag-usapan yung ekonomiya. Dahil medyo 50-50 ako sa Philippine economy this year. So mukhang global growth is slowing down this year. But also inflation is going down. But at the same time, FDI and foreign direct investment is also not doing good. So let's look at that. But before that, pag-usapan muna natin, medyo magpolitika tayo ng konti. Pag-usapan natin ito yung mga latest numbers na nakita natin dito sa survey ng Pulse Asia. Of course, maraming salamat sa ating mga kaibigan na nagpadala sa atin ang mga kopya ng mga ganitong surveys. Ito na. Okay, so let's go one by one. Para naman, diba? Para naman mga kameta. Ayan. Sorry, hindi ko alam bakit walang sound kanina. Kininig ko naman dun sa mga ka-tiktokers natin. Okay. O, di ba? O, alam mo, isa pang gusto kong baguhin, yung itong idea na pag TikTok, magsasayaw ka, hindi naman. Pwede mo naman gamitin yung TikTok for other kinds of engagement, katulad ng ginagawa natin, political analysis. Pwede naman, may mga kasama din tayo na ginagamit ang TikTok, for instance, for financial literacy. Ayan. O, yung mga Bitcoiners, naku po, mag-decision na tayo in the next 12 hours, magkakaroon din ng development yata sa Bitcoin, na wala si Kristan patulong sana ako bibili ng Bitcoin. Anyway, stressed ako dyan sa Bitcoin na yan. Kasi malaking decision yan. Anyway, hindi naman malaking pera yung ilalagay natin, but still, ako naman, Ilocano, bawat piso, malaking issue yan. Actually, isa pang dahilan medyo nasa-stress ako ngayon, inisip ko kung bibili pa ako ng isa pang 4K na camera. Dahil may mga inisip tayo na gagawin na solid na sa mga solid na mga travels, foreign travels, international travels. I was thinking siguro kulang itong mga cameras natin. Gusto ko maganda. So, nag-research pa ako kung magandang RX100 or ano ba yung best versions in. Kasi nga, medyo mahal. Baka check ko na lang abroad. So, yan. Like, yung mga ganitong bagay, stress tayo mga kameta. Check ko pa yung mga... Kasi kailangan natin medyo upgrade na rin natin yung production natin. Because I'm looking at doing some sort of political, social, travel kind of analysis. Kind of Haydarian style. But anyway, pag-usapan natin ito mamaya. Oh, by the way, I'll have to do a separate thank you. Salamat din doon sa mga kameta natin na nagpadala ng tulong doon sa outreach program natin sa Mindanao, sa Surigao del Norte, among others. Ipopost ko yung mga pictures, yung mga chinelas, yung mga school supplies, yung mga vitamins, yung mga binili ng ating mga kaibigan, si Din June, nung nandun siya sa Mindanao. So thank you so much sa lahat ng mga kameta natin na nagpadala ng suporta. So diniretso ko na rin yan ito sa dun sa ating mga kaibigan on the ground sa Mindanao. So we hope to continue yung mga ganitong efforts, and hopefully we'll also have more of that dito sa Metro Manila naman. So alam mo naman, on the sides, konting tulong na lang natin sa bayan natin. Hindi lang sa in terms of intellectual contribution, medyo konting contribution here and there. So super salamat. God bless you all. Kasi dinistribute natin yan nung panahon ng Christmas at saka paput ng New Year. So, malaking blessing po sa inyo yan. So, thank you so much sa lahat ng mga kameta na padala ng suporta sa atin dun sa outreach program natin sa Mindanao. So, hopefully we'll have more of that, including dito sa Metro Manila at saka mga underprivileged areas. So, God bless po. Thank you so much. Maraming salamat. Now, balikan natin ito. Ayan na kagad, si Mike Kuyugan. Kinukuyog, ano mo na yung survey. Wait lang, relax lang kayo. Sabi nga kung tinignan yung survey, actually, Pulse Asia survey ang best. Hindi lang dahil best siya. Dahil actually, kung tinignan mo yung pag-asa ng mga opposition sa Senado next year, ang pinaka-hopeful na survey, actually, Pulse Asia. Diba? Katulad ng ina-analyze natin ng isang araw, sabi ko, sa Pulse Asia mo lang makita na at least 3 kandidato from the opposition who could make it to the Senate next year. Doon sa mga iba, sobrang hopeless case. Digong pa nga number 1 doon sa isang survey na whatever. So actually, huwag na naman i-bash yung Pulse Asia. Basahin nyo naman. Anyway, di naman kayo nagsalita nung bumaba yung approval nila sa Pulse Asia. Huwag tayong gano'n. Huwag tayong ayaw yung ganyan style. Yung yung ayaw mo, hindi magandang performance dun sa survey, okay ka na. Tapos pag medyo gumandang survey yung ayaw mo, biglang ayaw mo na sa survey, huwag ganun. Sorry sir, hindi kita inaaway. Sinasabi ko lang, hindi naman ikaw lang ganyan. I mean, lahat naman tayo may tendency ganun, sir. Pasensya na, sir. Oo, huwag mo na awayin. Mike, kaibigan po tayo. God bless. Pero actually, agree ako na may konting conditioning talagang surveys in a sense na kung sobrang wala kang pag-asa sa mga surveys, mawawala ng pag-asa yung mga founders mo, so magiging self-fulfilling prophecy yan. Pero in terms of sino magta-top and all, alam naman natin very variable yung trend line. So, the conditioning is quite questionable. But it's conditioning to a certain degree in terms of filtering out yung mga medyo outliers or yung medyo hirap. No? But anyway, pulse ratio to, sir. Ma'am Melissa, sorry. Eto, balikan natin itong pulse ratio survey na ito. Bago kayo mag-bash na naman, yan kasi ang ayoko dun sa election na nangyari. Ayun yung result ng election, i-question yan. Ayun yung i-question yan. Well, ano nang basehan natin ngayon? Google Trends? Anyway, return. Na-distract tayo. Sorry mga kameta, nagre-reply lang ako. But don't worry, may mga layers sa survey na to na gusto kong pag-usapan dahil dito nakikita natin na maraming kakulangan talaga. May maraming kakulangan ng BBM administration. Yung mga DDS natin, kahit matutuwa naman kayo sa akin, di ba? Yan, kikriticize naman natin si BBM. Okay. Ito. So si BBM, parang 1 point lang yata umakit sa kanya. So, itong interesting mga kameta. Si BBM, ang approval niya ay 68%. So, hindi ganun kataas, right? Usually, we'd expect 70% plus, pero within the margin of error, more or less of around 70%. Ang baba niya sa Mindanao, 62% lang siya, which is quite interesting. So, siguro, ang pwede mong isipin dyan, siguro isang dahilan, ay dahil mas apektado siguro yung mga rehiyon ng Mindanao pag yung ekonomiya natin ay hindi ganun kaganda. Lalong-lalo na pag medyo tumataas yung presyo ng mga bilihin. So, tumataas yung inflation rate. Napag-usapan natin in the next slide. Don't worry about it. So, I think may kinalaman dyan. Pero more importantly, I think may kinalaman din ito sa hidwaan sa loob ng unit team. Or whatever is left of unit team. Alam, the reason masasabi ko yan is dahil taga-solid north tayo. So, pag nasa solid north ka, sa north ka ng Philippines, Ilocos, siguro Baguio, ganun. Marami kang marinig na hindi ganun ka natutuwa sa mga Dutertes. Kasi tingin nila, inawa yung kanilang hero, di ba? Yung kanilang Hercules, si BBM. So I won't be surprised sa Mindanao, may mga hindi rin natutuwa kay BBM kasi inaaway. Hindi naman BBM mismo, pero yung administration na or yung mga aliado na inaaway sila Sara or inaaway si Digong, or at least inaaway ni Digong yung mga yan, so parang tingin nila hindi ganun kaganda. So I'm not surprised na ang pinakamababa kay BBM is actually Mindanao. But I think the other interesting and surprising thing, or maybe not so surprising, is that actually in terms of socioeconomic class, ang pinakamababa in terms of support for BBM is yung ABC. Ito yung middle class. Now, this is interestingly because, ayan naman tayo, these are the facts, okay? Hindi ko alam yung mga kwentong barbero dyan sa mga dilawan circles, pero ito yung facts, Ito yung tinatawag na disciplinary politics. We have many examples around the world. From Chile in the 1970s, to Turkey from 1990s and 2000 onwards, to Thailand since, the coups against, first coups against Thaksin and the sister, etc. We have many examples, not to mention also in Brazil, we have many examples kung saan yung middle class actually nag-side dun sa mga right-wing populist, demagogic, or medyo trapo politicians. Like Bolsonaro had a significant middle class base, right? Yung mga pro-military people sa Thailand, significant yung middle class base. Yung Chile, yung nagpatalsik sa Salvador Allende administration na leftist, malaking middle class support. So actually, there's a very good literature kung saan pinapakita na malaki yung tendency na ang middle class ay magsusupport ng isang authoritarian populist leader kung nawala sila ng pag-asa dun sa buong democratic system, and more importantly, kung meron silang medyo elitist na tingin kung saan nakikita nila yung mga masses as a potential source of threat in so many different ways, no? And there's a fear of redistributive leftist populism. So these are historical cases, whether it's Chile, it's Turkey, it's Thailand, it's Brazil. I can give you many examples kung saan actually middle classes ay sumuporta sa isang demagogic populist or right-wing illiberal leader. So that's why si Digong actually did very well among middle classes. In fact, Digong did very well in some pre-election surveys among top officials of the Department of Finance and among a lot of business groups and corporations. I also have some information from some of my friends na nag-work sa mga big corporations dito sa Philippines. Nag-internal survey sila. Ang taas ng vote ni Digong noong 2016, ang taas din ng vote ni BBM at saka ni Sara noong 2022. So, yung idea na pag edukado ka or mayaman ka, gusto mo lang yung mga progressive, leftist, ganun, there's no evidence to back that up. No evidence in a sense that sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it's not predetermined. And alam natin, based on the literature, there are many instances whereby the middle class tends to actually support more authoritarian systems or right-wing populist. If I'm not mistaken, the latest one is yung kasalukuyan ng presidente ng Argentina, no? Na isa pang Milei ba yan? Na super right-wing na crazy libertarian din. Marami din middle class Argentinian na suporta sa kanya dahil ayaw nila yung leftist, peronismo, and all of that na naranasan nila in the past. So there's absolutely nothing that guarantees na just because isang tao ay edukado, ay doon galing sa UP at Lasal or kumikita ng ganitong 2 million, 3 million per year, if not 1 million per year, ay automatically doon na sila, I don't know, kay Lenny or progressive or whatever. No, there's absolutely no evidence for that. In fact, the evidence points in the opposite direction in social conditions like what we have in the Philippines. Extreme levels of inequality, failed state institutions, bad infrastructure, dissatisfaction with democratic system. Anyway, marami tayong lectures na ginawa dyan, and you're free to read my book, The Rise of Duterte, na sinulat natin noong 2016-2017, kung saan in-explain ko yung context of Rise of Duterte. And you're also free to read yung ating journal article on Journal of Democracy, titled The Return of the Marcos Dynasty. Lahat yan in-explain ko yan with evidence, with data, with historical analysis. So, hindi tayo nagsasalita ng kwentong barbero, although gustong-gusto ko naman yung mga kwentong barbero. Isa sa mga gusto kong kausap, mga kaibigan natin na barbero. But when I say kwentong barbero, yung mga hanggang lang, pakit lang, pero walang basihan, di ba? Alright, in terms of empirical evidence. Anecdotal lang, sinabi niya ganito, ganito. Hindi pa rin chismis sa political analysis. Pero chismis sa politika, pero in political analysis, medyo ayos-ayosin mo naman yan. Okay. So, dito, it looks like BBM is losing the respect of the middle classes. Of course, still majority support him, but it doesn't look as enthusiastic as it used to be for people like BBM or essentially the Marcos brand and Duterte brand. So you see that the highest satisfaction is among ABC. Now, this is interesting because kanina lang in-explain ko, baka isa sa mga dahilan, probably the secondary, not primary reason. Of course, primary reason is yung unit team, Duterte team, yeah. But sabi ko, sa Mindanao siguro, isang dahilan na mababa rin ang approval ni BBM is that from the very beginning, hindi ganun kataas, but is also because siguro, mas apektado yung mga kaibigan natin sa Mindanao dahil mas malaking impact sa kanila pag tumaas talaga yung inflation. Dahil mas mataas yung incidence of poverty and inequality dyan sa Mindanao. Not entire Mindanao, but certain regions of Mindanao. So if you look at incidence of poverty, the poorest regions in the country tend to be in Mindanao. And the average income and incidence of poverty in Mindanao is much higher than Luzon, for instance, and also to sa Visayas. But here we have a situation whereby actually the wealthiest Filipinos, the ABC, which is just C. Katulad ng in-explain ko, almost imposible na magkaroon ka ng survey sa letter A. Ito yung mga mayayaman na naka-Ferrari and all. Or B, ito yung naka-BMW, Benz and all, right? And A and B are both gonna be in gated communities. So good luck ng survey sa mga yan. So generally mga C talaga yan. And A and B is just so small that it's irrelevant in electoral terms, but of course very relevant in political economic terms because sa kanila yung pera, no? So this is an interesting case, and I think it's worth looking at. But the numbers are not too far away. So you have 69% for D. Ito yung urban poor na pinakamalaking demographic. I think it's 55 to 60% of total voters. And around 25 to 30% of the voters is E68. So you would have thought that siguro sa E dapat pinakamahina si BBM because yung inflation issue, which we'll discuss shortly. Sara Duterte naman, her numbers are at 74%. So that makes her the most popular top official in the country, way ahead of Senate President Mig Zubiri, and way ahead of Romualdez. It's actually surprising. Ang baba ng approval ni Romualdez. Just 39%. Grabe. we'll talk about the Romualdez case later on. This is quite interesting. But ang baba, kasi naalala ko yung House Speaker mas mataas tsaka yung Senate mas mataas yung numero nila sa dati nilang sa nakaraan na administration. But anyway, ayan, si Francis Cayetano. Explain mo na yung mga Peronismo. We can have a totally different vlog on that. Kasi yung kaso ni Peron is very, very interesting. Remember kahapon pinag-usapan natin si Tulfo? Sabi ko yung ginagawa ni Tulfo is, andun pa rin yung macho, medyo right-wing populist appeal niya. Pero at the same time, pumaposition din siya to the other side. Medyo pa-left. Ay, no, medyo center, medyo progressive, ganon. Si Peron ay medyo may pagkaganon. But anyway, mahabang usapan yan. We can talk about hybrid populism later on in different lecture. As in lecture dapat, hindi lang live video. Don't worry mga kameta, we're working a number of videos, lecture type videos. But going back to this, so si Sara is pinakamataas, 74%. Way ahead of 49% for Zubiri and only 39% for Romualdez. And slightly ahead of Marcos Jr. So with margin of error 3 to 5%, almost in the same range sila. But Sara does even worse than BBM. In NCR, she's only at 61%. She does worse than BBM in Luzon. She slightly does better than BBM in Visayas, but she does so much better than BBM in Mindanao. Ang approval ni Sara Duterte sa Mindanao is 93%. So with the margin of error of 3 to 5%, that means Sara Duterte is essentially universally favored in Mindanao. So this is where you see the solid South, the solid South. Kasi solid South could also cover parts of Visayas Pero yung solid na solid talaga yung Mindanao base niya. And that's pushing up her overall average. Right? Because actually she's lower than BBM in Luzon and in NCR region, which is the most populous and developed regions of the country. So this is a very interesting. Bakit nandito si Dino? Anyway, this is a very interesting situation we're seeing here. Ngayon, pag tinignan mo naman sa demographics, interestingly, ang taas ng approval ni Sara sa demographic classes. So, habang 63% lang si BBM sa ABC, 72% si Sara Duterte sa ABC. So, dito, ito yung sinasabi ko na disciplinary politics. Ito yung sinasabi ko na quote-unquote reactionary middle class. Ito yung sinasabi ko na middle class na gusto sa mga medyo right-wing disciplinarian politician. Right? I gave you cases of Thailand, Turkey, Chile, Brazil, for instance. No? So, ito yung sinasabi ko. So, myth po. Hindi po totoo na sinasabi ng ibang tao dyan na pag edukado middle class, ano yan, liberal yan or leftist, hindi totoo yan sa Pilipinas. We can talk about other countries, UK, US, pero hindi sa Pilipinas. Hindi yan totoo. At least, hindi yun yung trend in the past 10 years. Base sa mga surveys na kita. May nagtatanong sa ICC, si Gil. Sir, meron tayong separate na vlog ginawa dyan. Please just go to my YouTube or Facebook. Makikita niyo marami tayong mga ginawang analysis on ICC, but we'll have more discussions on that soon again. Don't worry about it. Pero kahapon actually, di ba, yung live natin dito, pinag-usapan din natin yung white flag ni Digong. So medyo siguro concerned din si Digong dun sa direction ng ICC at alam niya, ang may baraha dito si BBM, hindi siya. So, this is the interesting case we see Sara Duterte. And then, the one that actually surprises me is how low Martin Romualdez is. And interestingly, ang pinakamataas ni Martin Romualdez is in Mindanao. Which is surprising because kung maalala niyo yung buong tambalos-los na away, ang kabangga niya yung taga Mindanao And yet, sa Mindanao siya mas popular. And then sa NCR pa siya sobrang unpopular. Only 32% yung kanyang approval. So, I don't know, kung may isa dyan na may ambition maging president sa 2028, I'm not sure how competitive that person is in the presidential race. Kaya sabi ko, malaki ang posibilidad na if ever, pwede nilang i-push Chacha and then i-parliamentary. So, hindi na kailangan tumakbo sa election. Basta ikaw ay galing sa isang party na pinakamalaking boto sa election at ikaw yung leader ng party niyan, ikaw ang pwede maging prime minister. So, kasi I'm looking at this. Sara still looks to me as the most competitive candidate for elections in 2028, diba? Ang layo niya, diba? Na hindi malayo kay BBM, pero malayo siya dun sa mga iba na potential positioning for the next highest office, whether it's Zubiri, Romualdez, and mga others, no? Okay, now let's go to the other issue, which is literally anong issue sa mga mahalaga sa ating mga kabayan. And this is where things get interesting, diba? I mean, eto na naman yung, kaya nga nag-react tayo dun sa nangyari kay Jokoy, kasi parang sinisi ka agad yung kanyang writers. Yan ang problema When things go wrong, ang style lang iba dyan, sisisihin yung mga alalay. When things go right, they claim all the credit. Very trapo, right? Very, very trapo. So yun yung tendency sa Pilipinas. When things go right, dahil yan sa kagalingan at yung husay ng ating minamahal na presidente. And then when things go wrong, ay dahil yan dun sa palpak ng assistant, dahil yan sa asawa niya, dahil yan sa ganyan niya, ganun na. That's the problem we have in politics. We don't extract accountability because we're very quick to point fingers in other direction when things go wrong. But we are always happy to give all the credit to mga lodis natin when things go right. Even if hindi naman talaga sila may responsibility talaga directly dyan, yung dahil yan sa magaling na secretary or minister, so on and so forth. But anyway, let's go to this other issue, which is, if you look at it, actually, ang pinakamahalaga sa ating para sa ating mga kababayan ay hindi issue ng droga, hindi federalism, right? Ang pinakamahalaga para sa ating mga kababayan is what you would expect, right? What you would always expect, diba? Ito, ekonomiya, especially control of inflation, right? Which was a very, very big problem last year, right? Ang laking-laking problema niyan. So, kung tinignan mo sa controlling of inflation, actually, yung approval ratings ay hindi ganun kataas. Right? Actually, the approval ratings are negative 2% in the fourth quarter of last year. Actually, bumaba pa ang approval. But surprisingly, mataas pa rin yung... sorry. Ito pala, sorry, hindi ito approval. It's just the urgency pala. Sorry ba? So actually, medyo mas less urgent sa fourth, kaya nga didn't make sense to me kasi bumaba actually inflation, di ba? So actually, medyo kumonti ang concern ng tao sa inflation, but barely, because this is within the margin of error 3 to 5%. But still, inflation by far is the majority issue. 74% in September, 72% in December. And then yung sahod, 49% in September, December 40%. So related dalawa yan, especially yung sahod at saka yung inflation, dahil of course, kung tumaas ang presyo ng mga bilhin, mas gusto mo na, di ba, kailangan mo na mas mataas ng sahod mo para ma-afford mo. So related talaga yung dalawa na yun. So kung bumaba yung isa, bumaba din yung isa. So they're what you call positively correlated. And then employment, statistically the same. Reducing the poverty, almost exactly the same. Interestingly, pag tinignan niyo dito, hindi ganun ka-priority ang fighting corruption sa Pilipinas. So parating natin sabi, galit ang Pilipinas sa corruption, ganito tayo, ganito. But actually, when you look at the surveys, it doesn't look like a top priority. Mas priority yung ekonomiya in general, rather than fighting corruption. So that means yung whole daan matuwid, rhetoric, that whole thing about malinis na gobyerno, tapat na gobyerno, the reason na hindi gumagana ito sa election as much as before ng 2010 is because may mga mas mahalaga para sa ating mga kababayan. Diba? So, number 5 pa lang ang fighting corruption and only 22%. In fact, in December, last month, only 19%. Even fewer Filipinos said that they're concerned about corruption, fighting graft and corruption as a top urgent issue. So, hindi ganun ka-urgent sa akin ng corruption. So, siguro, I don't know. Either dahil hindi ganun ka-corrupt yung sistema natin, which is, I'm not sure about that, or it's because parang siguro tanggap ng tao na given na talaga magkakaroon ng certain degree of corruption. So this is what I'm saying, na hindi bebenta yung sinasabi, yung style ng opposition ng tapat na gobyerno, gano'n. Sabi ko, parati ko sinasabi, husay ang hinahanap ng tao, decisive leadership ang hinahanap ng tao. Hindi yung tapat na gobyerno. I mean, not as much. Of course, people will be okay with it, but not as many. Only 19% identified fighting graft and corruption as an urgent. Again, urgency ang pinag-usapan. Hindi naman yung na ayaw nila ng walang corruption, pero hindi nila super priority yan. Alright? So, these are the things that we have to keep in mind. Now, if you look at the approval ratings, I'm trying to bring out the other surveys. Hindi ganun kaganda nung approval ng tao dun sa management ng inflation ng gobyerno. Right? Actually, 7 out of 10 Filipinos ay hindi natutuwa sa management ng inflation ng Marcos administration. So it's quite interesting. Inflation is the number one issue for more than 70% of Filipinos, right? More than 70% of Filipinos do not approve of the government's handling of inflation, and yet the president and the vice president have around 70% approval rating. Parang medyo weird yan. Right? I mean, does it even make sense? Kaya nga sabi ko, surveys cannot be just taken on face value. You have to interrogate surveys. Not yung style na lahat ng survey na yan ay bayaran, gano'n. Hindi gano'n. Yung critical thinking talaga. Right? So, kung titignan mo actually, so yun yung weird ito yung weird talaga. So ulitin natin ito yung weird. Okay? Ulitin natin, okay. Ito yung weird. Around 70% hindi natutuwa sa government management of inflation. Around 70% ay saying na ito yung pinaka-urgent na issue, itong inflation management. Pero yung approval rating ni President BBM at saka ni Vice President Sara Duterte ay around 70% too. So, how does that make sense, right? Kung daming tao ay hindi natutuwa sa management ng isang issue na napakamahalaga sa karamihan ng tao, then bakit ang taas sa approval ratings ng President and Vice President mo? Kaya nga sabi ko, you don't take approval ratings, surveys on face value, right? You can accept that the survey is legit, the methodology is correct, but you still have to interrogate it qualitatively. Diba? So, kaya nga sabi ko, dapat actually mas mahalaga na titignan mo yung approval ng tao on a case-to-case basis when it comes to key policies. That's where makikita mo kung ano talagang sentimento ng tao. But again, we can have a long conversation about this. I'm just saying, sometimes kung na-interrogate mo talaga yung survey, some don't make sense. So, I remember during Digong's time, more than 7 out of 10 Filipinos said they approve the drug war. But more than 8 out of 10 Filipinos said they're worried about EJK. They oppose EJK. Right? So how do you reconcile that? Parang ridiculous yung situation. Diba? So, ulitin natin. Ito yung situation natin. More than 70% identify inflation as the most important issue in the country in terms of urgency. More than 70% are saying hindi sila natutuwa dun sa management of inflation. And then more than 70% or around 70% approve yung performance ng President at Vice President mo. So, that has to be interrogated. So, you cannot just take them on face value. In the same way na panahon ni Digong, more than 70% approved the drug war, but more than 80% are opposing EJK or were concerned about EJK or were fearful of what it meant. So, ano ibig sabihin yan? So, in that case, ang explanation ko was, they agree with the drug war in principle, but they want a better method na hindi kasing bara-bara. Siguro they want a drug war minus all these EJKs. So, you have to interrogate that. You cannot just take it on face value and say, ito yung approval rating, therefore, napakagaling ng presidente. And I always say this, no? Most of the time, the good, competent presidents are actually the ones that are not popular. Because doing the right thing is usually the unpopular thing. Because doing the right thing means sacrifice, meaning maraming kang na babanggayin, meaning may mga gagawin ka na masakit in the short run, but they're good for the country and the people in the long run. It's like diet. So, una, hindi ka natutuwa, pero in the long run, it's good for you. Right? So popularity numbers actually do not mean much. What you have to look at is competence in terms of managing yung mga top and most important issues. That's a more reasonable way of approaching these kinds of surveys. Okay? So if you look at it again, so 70% of Filipinos disapprove yung Marcos administration performance on inflation, which I said is concern of 70% of people, right? So actually, net approval rating on controlling inflation is negative 64%. Negative 64% yung approval of handling of inflation issue. And so on and so forth. I mean, on the other issue, they're also not doing very well. Now, having said that, kamusta naman yung kalagayan ng ating ekonomiya? Now, if you look at 2024, it's really a mixed bag. No? And because it's a mixed bag, ang maging laro dito is, hindi naman spinning, but potential ang maging laro dito is, packaging and presentation. So I'll give you an example. So this is a very interesting case. So, nagsi-check lang ako about foreign direct investments. Of course, yung mga ibang kameta natin, familiar kayo dito, marami tayong mga vlogs about industrial policy, trade policy, nakausap natin yung mga kaibigan natin, mga ekonomista, historiador, mga experts. I talked about my take on industrial and trade policies, etc. So we had a lot of economics-related vlogs dito in the past. And in fact, one of our best podcasts, actually, 3 out of our top 20 podcasts had to do with industrial policy, trade policy, etc. And the responses were very good. A number of ambassadors, etc. nakinig sila. So, thank you so much for the support, mga kameta. Now, going back to this, these are the things that I find very interesting in the Philippines. So, I was just looking about, okay, anong kalagayan ng foreign direct investment? Kasi yung ating minamahal na Pangulo, ang dami niyang travels, By the way, mag-travel ulit siya next week. Pupunta naman Vietnam, di ba? So, kamusta naman? Ito na, almost 2 years na siya in power, di ba? Lampas na sa isang taon since yung mga first major travels niya, di ba? September pa lang ng 2022, nag-New York na siya, and then nag-Europe na siya noong October, nag-Brussels, gano'n. So, kamusta naman ang foreign direct investment? So, I was just curious, and then I went and said, okay, let's check. Kamusta ang latest FDI? And this is the interesting thing that we see. So, look at how, let's be nice, or maybe not. Medyo deceptive Tignan mo. So, if you look at the title of this news report, it says, Philippines surpasses Malaysia, Thailand in net foreign direct investments. Like, wow, impressive. Tinalo natin Thailand. Ang Thailand po, ang Detroit of Southeast of Asia. Karamihan ng mga ginagamit natin mga kotse, lalo yung mga Toyota, ay ginagawa hindi sa Japan, hindi sa China, ginagawa dyan sa Thailand. So Thailand produces more than 1 million cars a year. Close to 2 million, I think, some point. Now, humahabol lang Indonesia and Vietnam. Of course, Vietnam, may selling brand sila. And then Malaysia naman, Malaysia is known as the Silicon Valley of Asia. Not only it's a relatively wealthy country, they're almost a high-income country. So, in 2 to 3 years, Malaysia will be classified as a high-income country. Finally, ma-achieve nila yung dapat na-achieve nila na matagal. And, Malaysia has the proton cars, their own industrial base, etc. So, aminin natin, medyo malayo sila sa atin pagdating sa some of the fundamentals of economics, no? Industrial manufacturing capacity, per capita income. I think Thailand's per capita income is around $7,000 to $8,000. Philippines is just around $4,000. So, twice na mas mayaman ng isang average Thai compared to an average Filipino. So, we're roughly 10 years behind them in terms of per capita income. And then Malaysia is, I think, almost $11,000. So almost 3 times more yung per capita income nila. And we're not even looking at the quality of their economic growth. We're not even looking at income inequality. Now, of course, developing country din silang pareho. Wala sa kanyang dalawa yung OECD. But still, malayong-malayo sila sa atin on many fronts. So, impressive. Titignan mo itong title na to, sinasabi, Philippines surpasses Malaysia and Thailand in net foreign direct investments. And then like, okay, basahin natin. Anong meron? So, ito. Ito talaga. Yan ang sinasabi kong problema natin, mga kameta talaga. Ay. Okay, papakita ko lang dito sa mga kaibigan natin dito sa kabila na hindi nila nakita. Don't worry guys, i-upload ko rin ito separately para makita niyo naman with the PowerPoint, etc. Mga lobat na ito. Ito yung ibang version niya. Patience lang. Ito, okay. So, this is the other version. Ito yung billionary version. Kaya, kita nyo. Tingnan, nakalagay dito. Philippines surpasses Malaysia, Thailand, net foreign. And then, nung binasa mo, so, Philippines, nilampaso natin sa net foreign investment ang Malaysia and Thailand in the first 3 quarters 2023 ayon sa Department of Trade and Industry Undersecretary. Okay, whatever. And then, pag tinignan mo yan, actually, tinalo lang natin sila in terms of mas marami ang nawalang investment sa kanila kaysa sa atin. So parang it's a war in terms of negative. So kung negative, ito So Vietnam actually posted a 2% growth in their net FDI. Tapos sinabi pa dito, minimal. Okay, ang yabang natin, minimal lang natin yung positive 2.2% ng Vietnam. Pero purong negative sa ibang bansa. So actually, in the case of the Philippines, 15.9, 16% ang bumaba. 16% ang reduction ng net FDI inflow. So yung pumasok at lumabas, negative pa ang total. So, mas maraming lumabas kaysa pumasok sa FDI last year sa Pilipinas, sa first 3 quarters. Now, proud na proud tayo na 16% negative lang to dahil it's 18% in Indonesia, 50% in Thailand, and 60% in Malaysia. Right? So this is interesting. So for the first 3 quarters of 2020, the Philippines net inflows amounted to 5.8 billion pesos, higher than Malaysia's 4.9 and Thailand's 4.4. Okay. Now, the good news is that that kind of makes us number 3 in the region because we're just next after Singapore as usual. But alam niyo naman sa Singapore, actually yung pumapasok sa Singapore, usually nadidistribute yan across the region eh. So, given namang number 1 ng Singapore. Yung Vietnam kasi nag-post pa sila ng positive. Yung Philippines, number 3 tayo. Pero parang it's like having one eye in a valley of blind people. Parang ganun eh. So this is my problem. When you look at it, ang Pilipinas, napakababa already yung FDI stock natin. Yung foreign direct investment stock natin ay napakaliit kumpara dun sa mga kapitbahay natin. So kahit sila, mawalan sila ng, I don't know, 10 billion last year, wala yan in the greater scheme of things dahil yung FDI stock nila ay $500 billion. Right? Pero Pilipinas, sabi natin, 50-60 billion lang yung total FDI stock natin. Kung nawalan tayo ng 10 billion, ang laki mawawala sa atin. 15 to 20% ang mawawala sa atin. So this is what I'm saying. In fact, yun ang tinatawag na advantage of disadvantage or something like that, or advantage of laggards, or so panahon ng Asian financial crisis, for instance, Philippines actually suffered very low reductions in its GDP compared dun sa mga kapitbahay natin na I think 20% in Indonesia. But that was because the Philippines was less integrated and less developed than its counterpart. So, of course, madali mo sabihin na ang galing naman ng Pilipinas, nilampasan natin yung mga kapitbahay natin. Pero nilampasan natin sila kasi hindi naman tayo talaga masyadong we were not even there in the conversation to begin with, right? It's like, medyo kulelat ka nga sa klase, and then bumaba yung grado mo, pero mas bumaba yung grado nila. Pero overall, mas mataas pa rin sila sa'yo, di ba? So kung ikaw ay medyo laggard historically, you cannot afford to get into a race to the bottom race, right? You have to be in a positive territory. At the very least, you have to be like Vietnam, because Vietnam is catching up. Alam niyo naman, Vietnam, napakahirap na bansa, war-stricken, dami lang crisis, problems. So ngayon, medyo humahabol na sila. So, Vietnam, which has almost exactly the same level of per capita income as Indonesia and slightly higher than Philippines, just over $4,000. I think $4,300. Well, I mean, they're getting there in that right direction. So, yun lang sa akin. So, my concern, my worry sometimes is, ang mangyayari na lang sa atin is magsispin-spin na lang tayo. Na, okay lang naman na wala naman tayong FDI. Mas nawalan yung ng FDI yung kapitbahay natin. Yung parang, pero yung mga kapitbahay natin ay 2 times, 3 times more developed than us, at least in terms of per capita income, right? So, we cannot afford to have this race to the bottom kind of situation with them. Now, the slightly better news is the Philippines is expected to have a decent growth next year, right? But mukhang malabo na we can sustain that 6-7% growth that we have been used to in the past almost decade, since 2012 onwards, right? So siguro ang growth natin is 5.8% for this year. Better than last year na 5.4% lang. Pero still, Philippines, we should be growing 8 to 10% at least. So, that's my worry na medyo yung trend lines ng economy natin is, okay, inflation is coming down, which is great, pero growth is also not close to where it should be. We should grow 8 to 10% at least dahil ang baba pa rin ng per capita income natin. So maraming nagsabi na ang Pilipinas ang mayaman, ang problema lang distribution. But actually, Philippines, even if na-distribute mo completely equally yung economic wealth sa bansa natin, still we're considered a poor country. Because yung value ng ating exports ay napakababa kumpara sa ibang bansa. Kahit tayo isang, kilo ng, I don't know, kahit tayo sako-sako ng mga raw materials ng export natin, yung kabilang bansa, ang export lang nilang maliit na cellphone, magkasing level lang yung kanilang halaga, di ba? So we still have to really significantly develop our economy. And my worry is that sometimes hanggang mga spin na lang gagawin natin. So I think it's very important when we compare ourselves to our neighbors, we have to compare ourselves to poorer ASEAN countries that are growing very fast. So I think really Vietnam and Indonesia are a better comparison for us. And both of them, on almost every front, are doing better than the Philippines. So the challenge here for President Marcos Jr. is, I don't know, bahala na yung Marlica Fund. Tingnan natin ang mangyari dyan sa Marlica Fund. But I think the challenge here is to come out really with isang totoong strategy kung saan makonvince talaga itong mga foreign investors na mapunta talaga sa bansa natin and to take a bet on our country. And that's where corruption is important. We have to deal with it. That's where infrastructure development is important. That's where regulatory efficiency and all of those things, red tape reduction is important. But that's where also it's important na may tiwala ang mga investors sa kakayahan ng ating mga top leaders in terms of long-term planning, right? All of those things, right? So ito yung mga tinitignan natin ngayon, mga kameta. All right? Thank you very much. God bless, and talk to you soon. Sorry, I think I pressed the wrong button dito sa, wait lang. Ay, hindi pala. Andito pala ako. So, hindi mo na mag-goodbye. Sorry, akala ko na-cut na. Kasi biglang nawala eh. Anyway, I hope ma-appreciate nyo. Sorry, ang daldal natin. Ang dami natin sinabi. But don't worry, mga kameta. Everything I discuss here, dun sa trade policy, industrial policy, Google nyo lang, YouTube nyo lang yan. Meron na tayong mga analysis yan. And you can Google those things on your own. Alright? But we'll have more discussions on that. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, and it's gonna be a spin game in a certain sense. Opposition will say their own thing, the other side will their own thing. But as I said, for me, the most fundamental issue is this weird situation whereby 70% say mahalaga yung inflation, napaka-urgent. 70% say hindi sila natutuwa sa ginagawa ng gobyerno. And then 70% are okay dun sa approval nila ng gobyerno. Like, ano ba nangyari dito, di ba? So, minsan parang ridiculous na rin yung mga yung mga nakikita natin. Not the survey method, but yung kalagayan ng ating political culture, to be honest about it. Okay, on that note, thank you very much mga kameta, ka-TikTokers natin, ka-YouTubers, and kameta natin sa Facebook. I hope you appreciate this long and late. I know medyo late na yung ating intervention. I'll try to come a little bit earlier in succeeding days, but I hope at least na-appreciate na humahabol tayo. Ganun ko kayo kamahal. So, inabol natin kahit medyo late na. On that note, thank you very much. God bless, and talk to you soon. And maraming salamat also again. Sobrang salamat doon sa mga nagpadala ng tulong doon sa ating mga outreach program sa Mindanao, mga others. And i-inform ko po kayo kung meron tayong mga iba, and ipopost ko rin yung pictures ng mga pinadala po natin ng mga outreach program and support, etc. And then, yes, and then of course, kung may recommendations kayo sa, anong mga digital na pwede natin bilhin for, like RX100, I don't know, GoPro, mga ganun. I think GoPro pwede ko na hiramin yun, meron ako alam. Also, magbigay ka ng technical advice. I appreciate that. Alright? Kasi gusto natin medyo upgrade yung mga ibang vlogs natin. Live, we do it as it is, but we want to be upgraded. On that note, thank you very much. God bless, and talk to you soon. Yeah, 4K. Yeah, thank you.